Good evening, everybody. I just want to warn you, I do have the Minnesota bug, so please, I apologize for my voice right off the bat. I want to thank you all for coming out tonight, and I want to thank Achieve Minneapolis for reaching out and asking me to speak on a topic that I'm really passionate about, which is service learning and youth voice. I'm really fortunate to work with teachers, young people, educators who are really passionate about making positive change in the world through service learning. And I really started to think about the theme of tonight's talk and what it really means to me. And so I want to just dig a little deeper into that idea of voice. So young people express their opinions, their attitudes. When we think about voice, we think about you can express yourself through song, and don't worry, I'm not going to sing, so, you know, even though this is kind of a rockin' stage, I do have to say that. We can share our voice through the written word, through research. Again, there's so many different ways that we can express ourselves. And then there's that idea of power. And a lot of times power scares people. We think sometimes we look at power as a bad thing, but it's that expression of our capacity and ability to share our voice through power to make change. When I think about power, I was thinking about the young people in Minneapolis who walked out of their classrooms and were looking to make change around gun control laws. I thought about Malala Yousafzai and our young Nobel Peace Prize laureate who stood up and used her power to try to make change against the Taliban's ban on young women getting an education. So a lot of times power, we think of someone else holding that power, but that power really lies within us, and it's something that we need to cultivate and really take ownership of. And then I was thinking about change. And change is something that many people are scared of, right? It's something that we tend to shy away from. We like to do what we've always done, right? We get comfortable, and it's that unknown. And even though change can bring something positive, we like to stay with the status quo. So then I was thinking, well, each of these three words really, when you think about each individually, you think about the fact that they really are the foundational elements of leadership, right? You know, they're leaders that set direction, they create vision and inspiration, they guide us into the future. And good leaders, and I think we can all agree on this, are ones that we want to work for. We want in our elected positions, and we want them in positions to make decisions. And they're the people that we want to lead us into the future. And I often hear adults talking about students, you know, whether it's teachers or educators or parents, that we want students to develop leadership skills. You know, we want them to develop those 21st century skills that we're all talking about so that they can get those jobs of the future. And yet we don't want them to lead now. We put up barriers and excuses and build out reasons why young people shouldn't be taking that leadership position now. And I think if we admit it, you know, we don't want change. So students bring new ideas to these solutions or to the issues, and we ask them, you know, for these ideas, for their input, but then we don't want to see it implemented because we get scared of change. You know, in order for students to really lead the way, we have to overcome our own fear of their ideas, of their voice, and what they have to say. You know, we need to really think about and change how we engage with students, change how we hear students, and most importantly, we need to really change how we think about and educate students. Education, I think, is a topic everyone has an opinion on, right? Like, we've all been through some sort of education. You know, we've had good teachers, maybe not so great teachers. We've sat in at a desk for hours on end, memorizing things that we could, so we can take that test, get that good score. I distinctly remember learning the state capitals and doing pretty well on that test, right? And now I use Alexa, and she tells me what state Kansas City's in. So I think we have to stop and think it's time for how we teach our young people. It needs to catch up with the technology and the aspirations that we have for today's youth and what they need to know for the future. So if we want them to develop as civically informed and engaged citizens with the knowledge and skills to lead us into the future, we need to provide them with opportunities to do that now. Practice, right? We need to start to develop those skill sets so that it's not someday in the future, that it's now. And service learning does that. So service learning, it's a teaching and learning pedagogy. I love using that word. I just like to say it. It's fun. And it supports students to develop as leaders by using their voice to address issues that they're passionate about, so that they're making meaningful change happen in their communities and around the world. And there are lots of different academic definitions of service learning, but since I'm with NYLC, I'm going to use ours. So we define service learning as an approach to teaching and learning in which students use academic and civic knowledge and skills to address a genuine community need. So service learning takes students out of the classroom, places them in their communities, and students act as change agents to make meaningful contribution. And this can be a little intimidating for adults and for students, honestly, because we're asking them to do something that we adults haven't done, right? Like, we haven't found the solutions to some of these problems, and yet we think, oh, how can young people, they don't have the experience, the knowledge to do this. But I would challenge as adults to remember that time when we were young and full of all of the ideas and possibilities of the world. And what if we had had the opportunity to take some of those really creative ideas and see if they worked? And that's what service learning does. It allows young people to learn and grow and take their voice and their passion and make change on issues that they care about. It takes those endless creative possibilities and it applies them to real-world needs. Sometimes students fail, and that's okay. It's part of the process. They reflect, they learn, they develop through continuous improvement. They're thinking about what they could do better and how they can learn from those failures. And when you stop and you think about whether it's poverty or climate change or education equity or, pick your critical world problem that we're going through right now, if we don't keep trying, those problems are never going to go away. And so engaging young people and thinking about these issues now, that's where that connection to learning really comes in and helps them become critical thinkers, thinking about world problems as part of this, that they can be part of the solution. And I know when we start talking about education, it comes back to, okay, what about the math, the English, the science? And the beauty of service learning is that they can do both. That's what service learning is. It's that connection between going out and making a positive contribution to your community, to the world, while you're learning math, science, and hopefully, if you're lucky, you're connecting it to music and arts and languages. So I want to just tell you a quick story because a lot of times, we talk up here about service learning and people are like, I still don't get it. And so I want to tell you a story about a service learning classroom. And so we're going to call this teacher Miss Berry. And she is a 7th grade science teacher. And she is, her school is located, close to the Mississippi River. And she is an amazing teacher. She decided, she knew she wanted her students to get out, to get their hands dirty. And so she started thinking about the observation techniques, the applied research, the basic environmental theory and botany that she needed her students to learn. And so she decided to step back and think about, okay, what evidence do I need as a teacher to make sure that I've met the academic outcomes that I need to see in my students? So she wanted to make sure that they did a research report, that they developed a presentation, and that she was going to grade on classroom participation. And so understanding what evidence she could accept, she got her class together and started asking them questions around how do organisms live and grow and respond to the environment? What happens when that environment changes? What's happening in our local environment that we should be aware of? So really started them thinking about what's happening in the community, but also thinking about the issue or the knowledge skills that they needed to develop. So this was an 8-week service learning unit, and the students embarked on this service learning journey. They started discussing the changes that they were seeing in the park near their school. They started investigating by taking water samples from the river. They documented local plant life. They identified pollutants that they found, and then they started coming up with possible solutions. So they dug in and they got their hands dirty and really looked at what was happening right near their school. So then in partnership with Miss Berry, they determined that they wanted to address invasive species that they found were growing on the park trails near the water. And they wanted to plant new native plants so that they could address soil erosion and water quality. So they reached out to their local park service along with, there was a corporation that was involved and a local nonprofit. And the students began to plan and prepare for their service event. So they developed timelines and budgets and presentations and all of the things that go into planning an event, which the folks here know a lot about. And then 6 weeks after they started this service learning journey, the students were ready for their day of service. So they had invited the other science classes to partake in their day of action, right? And so the Parks Department had lent them shovels. They got from a local home store that they had presented to. They got trash bags and gloves. And the local nonprofit donated native plants for their project. And they got busy. The students in Miss Berry's class were the leads for their day of action. So they led the other students and the teachers from the other classes and helped explain what was going on, why they were doing what they were doing. And they took ownership not only of the learning all of the work that they had done beforehand, but the day itself, and they led the event. And that's one of the remarkable things about service learning is that you get to see young people take on those leadership roles. So after this day of service, Ms. Johnson connected with her students through reflection, but she also reflected herself that through this, the way she had connected with her students reminded her why she became a teacher. So it was that, they connected on this level, their love of what they were doing, that engagement. It helped her remember that this was the reason she went into teaching, was to inspire this type of learning. And then as the students reflected, they learned what they would do differently, how they would continue. They talked about how they would continue to share this with other classes, and how they would engage more people in the process. And as part of that, they then developed a presentation about that experience and presented it at a school assembly. And so many students were interested in what they had done and what they had accomplished that now, 20 years later, they still have a service learning club that adopted that local park, and they're still doing, the entire district has classes that go out and are engaged in this service learning project. It's absolutely phenomenal. So our connection to community, it really deepens the impact that the projects have on learning. The students start to understand why they are learning what they are learning and how to use that now and in the future. And it's that power and voice that helps them make that positive change in the world. And it's really important, I can't emphasize this enough, that service learning is a process. It's not the project. It wasn't that single day of action. A lot of times service learning gets confused with service or volunteering. And, I'll be completely honest with you. I'm not a fan of mandatory service. I think the moment that you apply a number to what you're expecting students to do, it becomes something they can check off their list, right? Like, I'm done, okay, I've got my service hours for graduation, woohoo, I can move on. And that's not what we want. We want to ingrain service as part of who we are as citizens. We want it to be part of their plan moving forward. We want them to volunteer, to coach baseball, to be on the PTA, to volunteer with a local nonprofit, to be an elected official, right? Like, service is part of what we need to hold our nation together. It's the glue. And so by making it mandatory, by putting a number on it, we're not inspiring them for lifelong commitment. We're saying you get to check it off and say it's something that you did, that it's a resume builder. But service learning helps it become part of the character, the values that young people are developing. Service learning also helps students, again, I said this a few times, but it makes the connections outside the classroom. It's hands-on learning. And really, I think it's important where service learning, it helps young people understand that they're not liberators of community, but rather they're working in partnership with the community. They're not doing for, they're doing with. And so I think that part of service learning is often overlooked. And we need to step back and think about the fact that this is hard, right? It's hard work. We're asking educators to think differently about how they teach young people. And this can be in the classroom or in after-school programs. But this vision of learning, it flips the traditional classrooms, and young people see themselves, again, as change agents, but they're working together to solve an issue. So students start teaching other students. You start seeing teachers becoming guides on the side, where they're facilitating students' self-discovery of learning. And we know this type of learning is effective because brain-based learning, like service learning, it works when there's active engagement in the learning process. Students are excited and invested in the learning because they get to choose the activity that they're doing. And that reflection, again, and feedback, it allows for that continuous improvement. Failure occurs, right? And they learn from it and they grow from it. So students become challenged by complex issues, and they're allowed to engage and solve. And that's what we're needing to develop as for them, not just now, for the future, but now. And I would say service learning actually helps students learn better. When you use service learning as a learning strategy, you start to see growth in personal development. They see themselves as those change agents, as leaders, as contributors to a better world. There's interpersonal development and social comfort. They work in groups, they come to consensus. There's values development, there's academic, cognitive. There's a ton of research that supports service learning, but I think one of the greatest pieces of connection for those students is that they understand why they're learning, what they're learning, and they're developing a new type of relationship with each other and with the educator. It becomes a reciprocal partnership. And I think we can all agree that today, more than ever, we have to really, we're in desperate need of that type of development in our young people, of that type of skill set, and honestly, not just for young people, for adults as well. Just a couple more things I want to say about service learning. Another benefit that I think is important is that young people really get to start to explore careers and their own skill development, and it accommodates different learning styles. So I know I've thrown a lot of things of what it can do, but if I can ask you to remember just one thing, is that it shows young people that they can be leaders today, not someday in some different time, but right now. And that motivates them to do more and to learn more. And I think, so I know I just have a couple more minutes, but I wanted to share with you, NYLC had the opportunity to work in an inner city Chicago school, and I think I'm on that slide. Yes, I am. And this was an alternative school. It was a last chance school, so students there were either on the verge of failing, they'd been either kicked out of the regular public school, or they had already dropped out. And when we brought service learning into the schools, when we began working with the teachers, one teacher said, when we use service learning, the students show up. And when you get them there, when you get them in their seats, we can teach them. So service learning is really that motivator to these students who never considered themselves leaders in the community. They did a community walkabout to figure out what was happening around what issue they wanted to address. And they found that they had a handful of fast food options within walking distance of their school, but no access to healthy foods. So as part of their classwork, they developed a community garden, and that garden serves not only the school, but the local community. And so that garden is still going strong today. So, I just use this example as one to show how even young people who aren't in your typical classroom can be empowered by this type of learning. And there's a quote from Ben Franklin that I think just kind of summarizes this best for me. It says, "Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn." And I would say, service learning can be scary, it can be hard, it's a different way of thinking and learning, but students do understand what they're learning, why they're learning it. They engage as active citizens who are informed, who go out and dig for the information that they need to make good decisions. They learn from mistakes. And I think the question really becomes, for all of us, is, as adults, are we willing to be brave enough to allow this form of change to happen in our schools, in our after-school programs with our young people? And we also have to ask ourselves, can we afford not to be brave enough? Thank you.